What it do, Dream Team? It's your boy Neal back with another reaction video, guys. Here we are with USA versus Germany prisons. A shocking look behind bars. Before we dive into this, I'm gonna let y'all know I'm breaking this video into two different parts. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, get a video a thumbs up so it gets suggested. You guys got a favorite video suggestion, you can subscribe to Patreon and drop it in the comment section. What we got?
And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society.
We have to acknowledge that there is something wrong when we are locking up this many folks with this kind of frequency.
Instead of trying to fight what the system is, let's try to find a way to do something that might work compared to the last 200 years of America. Locking them up and throwing away the key doesn't fix anything.
By this point, we've all heard the infamous statistic. The United States houses almost a quarter of the world's prison population.
That's crazy.
But how much of mass incarceration is a result on the war on drugs? Or simply just because of stricter sentencing policies? What do prisons look like right here in Germany? And how do their programs differ, not just from a punishment standpoint, but in their ability to rehabilitate inmates and reduce the instance of former offenders, including teens and young adults, from re-entering the prison system in the future?
Prisons in America are too profitable. It's about profit here in America, right? You know, the more people you lock up, the more profitable it is. So they're almost incentivized to lock people up, I feel like, and throw away the key. I feel like you want people to come back because then you profit. That's how I feel about it.
These essential questions are actually a lot harder to answer than you might expect. So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Let's do it. Less crime, but more prisoners. Why?
So why does America imprison so many people? Well, that just might be one of the most loaded questions ever asked on this channel because there really isn't just one straight answer to it. In short, the rise of crime, with the exception of white-collar crime, goes part and parcel with many of the legacies left from policies that systematically disenfranchise minorities, while at the same time widening the gap between the haves and have-nots. Along with the rise of segregation by income and race in the suburbs, we see a greater concentration of violent crime in the aftermath of the declining communities, more wealthy families left behind, taking their tax dollars with them that goes toward funding for police, fire, roads, schools, and public infrastructure. And again, while I don't think it's really correct just to lay this entire problem at the feet of urban planning and planning policies, I do believe that this is actually a big part in why property crime and violent crime are significantly lower here in Germany. Communities here are not only more homogenous by income, but being in a low-income or high-income community doesn't mean you have major differences in the quality of public transit, public schools, or opportunities for work. But it makes a huge difference in the United States. So today, in the United States, those areas where violence, drug crime, and gun violence run the most rampant are also the places where the root causes of poverty also run the most rampant.
Of course.
But here's something interesting.
There's definitely a big separation, a huge gap in America between the haves and the have-nots. You put all the have-nots in one place. You put all the haves in one place. The have-nots gotta survive. They want to survive. You're not letting them have. So at some point, they start taking.
In the first episode of our series, I discussed crime and how property crime and violent crime have actually dropped dramatically in both the US and Germany over the past 30 years. So how can it be then that we're imprisoning more people in the US if less crime is being committed? Well, there's two reasons really, and the first is that we've actually experienced an explosion in drug-related offenses. In 1980, imprisonment for drug offenses was rare, with a combined state incarceration rate of 15 per 100,000 population. But by 2010, the drug
My
incarceration
God.
rate had increased nearly tenfold to 143 per 100,000 people. And the growth in imprisonment, most rapid in the 1980s and then slower in the 90s and 2000s, is attributable largely to increases in prison admission rates and time served. And those increased admission rates are closely associated with increased incarceration for drug crimes. And interestingly, drug offenses and addiction don't actually play as big of a role in the criminal justice system here in Germany. Instead, they rely on the harm reduction approach as their primary response to drug use. So rather than target minor possession or sales, law enforcement focuses instead on more significant crimes, such as drug trafficking. And so as a result, the number of people incarcerated in Germany for minor drug offenses is actually relatively really small. But the second reason for America's significantly larger incarceration rate actually goes back to the general law and order approach that Americans tend to take towards incarceration and sentencing. According to the most recent estimates, there are 2 million people in U.S. prison and jails,
My
a
God.
500% increase over the last 40 years. And changes in sentencing law and policy, not changes in crime rates, explain most of this increase. And according to
So it's not that the crime, it's the sentencing and the policy that changes in order to lock more people up. Yet the crime rate is still the same, but the amount of people in prison is over 500% more than it was. That's insane, bro. Like, that is, it's for profit.
researchers, there are actually 2 big phases that have affected this shift. Some positive, some negative, depending on who you ask. From the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, there was a wave of reforms aimed at making sentencing procedures fairer and outcomes more predictable and consistent. The problems to be solved were racial and other unwarranted disparities, and the mechanisms for solving it were various kinds of comprehensive sentencing and parole guidelines and statutory sentencing standards. But then in the second phase, from about the mid-1980s through 1996, we saw changes in sentencing policies that were aimed at primarily making sentences for drugs and violent crimes harsher, and their imprisonment more certain. Mandatory minimum sentence laws required minimum prison terms for people convicted of particular crimes. 3 strikes laws typically required a minimum of a 25-year sentence for people convicted of a 3rd felony. And state truth in sentencing laws typically required that people sentenced to imprisonment for affected crimes serve at least 85% of their nominal sentence. And all of these things together are why today, amid historically low crime rates, there are a record 206,268 people serving life or virtual life sentences in America's prisons. 1 out of every 7 people in prison. Now, admittedly, this next statistic is a little bit old. I couldn't find a more modern replication of this study, but it's striking nonetheless. In 2006 in Germany, 75% of prison sentences were for 12 months or less.
Wow.
And 92% of sentences were for 2 years or less. In addition, Germany suspended the vast majority of prison sentences that were under 2 years, about 75% of those cases. So only a very small percentage of those sentenced actually ever went to prison. But you know, the other big issue here too is
That's crazy. Is it the same crimes? It can't be like the same crime that we're locking people up almost for life for, that other people in Germany are getting out in 2 years. This is interesting now.
is that crime is heavily politicized in the United States. And whether you're Democrat or Republican, nobody really wants to be seen as being light on crime. Even though national survey data shows us that most victims support violence prevention, social investment, and alternatives to incarceration that address the root cause of the crime, policymakers, judges, and prosecutors often invoke the name of the victims to justify long sentences for violent offenses because often these people have to run for re-election.
When we're talking about serious and violent crime, lock them up. In San Francisco, in my office, we've increased the conviction rates for the DA's office to the highest they've been in just under 15 years.
Not all U.S. states elect their judges through elections, but it's worth noting that partisan elections are held to select most or all judges in 13 states, and for some judges in an additional 8 states. Meaning not only are they on the voting ballot like any other politician, but that in 13 states they also have to list whether they're Republican or Democrat. But on the flip side of things, here in Germany, judges and prosecutors aren't elected. They're government employees who are insulated from public opinion. And their work is really seen as just being more technical. Their role is to protect the rational system of correction, which aims to restrict freedom the least amount necessary, and to do so from the retributive impulses that individual victims and society in general might feel. Okay, and speaking of Germany,
I just feel like that sounds like a much better system. It sounds like they definitely have it figured out much more than we do when it comes to being able to rehabilitate. Our goal is, I feel like, to lock people up and throw away the key, like they said earlier. Where I feel like it seems like Germany is really about rehabilitating the individual, but they don't want to lock them up as much as possible or throw away the key. They want to get them back out into society. That's crazy.
Victims and society in general might feel. Okay, and speaking of Germany, I think this is kind of enough of a background on Germany and the US. I think it's actually time we take a look inside a German prison and just see how different things look compared to the United States. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, in the United States, there are roughly 2 million people currently incarcerated. And I think what's actually super fascinating is that the conditions of their imprisonment in the United States are pretty miserable by most international standards. Most US prisons lack fresh air, healthy food, natural light, proper health care, and connection to loved ones. And for so many, punishment means not only the temporary loss of liberty, but brutal prison conditions. In a new report spearheaded by the Yale Law School, the number of prisoners subjected to restrictive housing, which is what solitary confinement is officially known by, stood between 41,000 and 48,000 in the summer of 2021. They were being held alone in cells the size of parking spaces for 22 hours a day on average, and for at least 15 days. And within that number, more than 6,000 prisoners have been held in isolation for over a year. They include almost 1,000 people who have been held on their own in potentially damaging confined spaces for a decade or longer, in breach of minimum standards laid down by the UN, which considers such isolation a form of torture. And compare this to Germany, where solitary confinement is not only rare, it's only used in exceptional cases for a very short period of time. At Waldeck prison, for example, solitary confinement reportedly was only used 2 or 3 times in the past year, while Neustrelitz prison had utilized its segregation cell twice in 5 years, and only for a few hours each time. And by legal statute, this kind of disciplinary detention cannot exceed, in any given year, 4 weeks in Germany. But honestly, even outside of solitary confinement, the conditions of an American prison cell are extremely different from what you'll find here in Germany. On the extreme end of the spectrum, you have U.S. Penitentiary Administrative Maximum, also known as ADX Florence, which has been nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies and Supermax. It's a modern super maximum security federal prison located in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains near Florence, Colorado. Opened in 1994, the ADX Supermax facility was designed to incarcerate and isolate criminals deemed as being too dangerous for even the average prison system.
Wow.
The majority of prisoners here...
That's crazy. To be too dangerous for the average prison system is absolutely baffling and insane to me.
Here are kept in administrative segregation. They're confined to a specifically designed single-person cell for 23 hours a day.
God
Prisoners
dang.
are only moved around under strict restraints, handcuffed, shackled, or both. And for their 1 hour a day that they get outside of that cell, they're only allowed to shower, exercise, and if they get the privilege, make a phone call. But to be honest, even the prison that's been nicknamed America's cushiest prison or Camp Cupcake, seriously,
Really?
it actually really isn't all that nice. FCP Alderson, located in the foothills of West Virginia's Allegheny Mountains, has housed some pretty famous inmates, from Martha Stewart to an ex-beauty queen to a famous American jazz singer. Built in 1928, the prison was actually the first federal prison for women, and today it uses a reformatory model where women are housed in cottages and there's no barbed wire. But unlike their counterparts in the United States, German prisoners actually sleep on a bed with a real mattress, not just a thin foam pad on top of a concrete slab. At Heidering prison near Berlin, for example, not only do they stay in rooms that more closely resemble an IKEA showroom, but they have privacy. Correctional officers knock before entering, and prisoners get to wear their own clothes. They can decorate their space as they wish, and they cook their own meals, are paid more for their work, and have opportunities to visit family, learn skills, and gain education. In fact, inmates are actually required to save money to ensure that they're not penniless upon release. Now, to be fair, Heidering prison is one of the newest prisons in Germany and doesn't necessarily represent the standard of prison life across the country as a whole. So not too far away is another prison, the Tegel Correctional Center, opened in 1898 and is actually the oldest prison in Berlin. But things here are still much less institutional than American prisons. They do have institutional clothing, which is provided, but again, you're allowed to wear your own clothes if you want to. Each unit has a specific time and day, which relatives can actually drop off clothes for the inmates. That's
crazy. Everybody got their own TV. Everybody, it's just like a room. Everybody chilling.
Then exchange their dirty laundry and get fresh clothing from their relatives each week. And at this prison in Berlin, there's a workshop where inmates build and repair bicycles. But I think what's most remarkable at Tegel prison is that there are 33 physicians to care for 4,200 inmates. That's a ratio of about 1 doctor for every 120 prisoners. By contrast, in the Virginia state system, according to a recent count, there was 1 doctor for every 750 inmates. And to be honest, when we look at all of what this means collectively for life in prison between the US and Germany, it says a lot about how we regard prisoners as our society. Because at the end of the day, the American society very much kind of has this attitude of lock them up and throw away the key. And when that's your attitude, you don't really care so much about what the conditions are of a prison system because you're not really thinking about these people getting out and what their life's going to be like afterwards. But in Germany,
I feel like they make it almost impossible to survive once you get out. So what do? You go right back in. This is crazy. Insane. Completely different systems, and it seems like Germany's system is working a lot better. We're gonna do part 2 tomorrow, but that's all we got for this one. If you guys got a favorite video suggestion, you can subscribe to Patreon or drop it in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel, ring notification bell, get a video a thumbs up so it gets suggested. I got social media, Patreon all up top. You want to subscribe to any of it, put all the links in the description. All you gotta do is hit the link, follow me, talk to me. Love talking to you guys. You guys are the most incredible team on YouTube. It's your boy Neal. Out.